Are young people just too emotional? That is the question that C.S. Lewis addresses in his Abolition of Man, or at least one of the questions. And it's a particularly common one. I don't know how often I have heard an older man look at younger kids and say, they're just so emotional, they need to follow their reason and just do the right thing. They're all about their feelings, and there's some negative appraisal made about people who simply follow their feelings. And you might expect that C.S. Lewis, a man of his age, would agree. You gotta just use reason, don't trust your feelings, they're essentially bad. But in fact, C.S. Lewis argues that this answer is essentially modern. It is a rationalist response to the non-reality of the world around us. It's saying your emotions are just how you feel. They have nothing to do with how you are or the objective world around us, but rather your feelings are something that need to be modified based on your reason, whether or not your reasoning, whether or not something is useful or helpful or workable. So he has this. He says, of these modern day rationalists, they see the world around them swayed by emotional propaganda. They have learned from tradition that youth is sentimental, and they conclude that the best thing they can do is fortify the minds of young people against emotion. I don't know how many times I've heard something like this before in different words. You're too emotional. Don't listen to your feelings. You can't trust your feelings. What a modern take. What a divorce of your emotional, heartfelt life and your mental life. Later on, C.S. Lewis will say these are people who lack chests. These are men with no heart, who have no ability to think. They're cold and calculating and all about rationalism. Sometimes even in faith circles, you'll see this binary. In faith circles, you have the really emotional people who say, it's all about my feelings. Thinking is, not that important. And then they'll be looked down upon by others who will say it's all about the truth and being right and having rationalism and reason behind you. And while we definitely want to know what is true and right, C.S. Lewis would never deny that, it's not quite, the way that this question has been answered, as I've described it, it's not quite right. Lewis says, this isn't it. He says, my own experience as a teacher tells an opposite tale. He says, for every one pupil who needs to be guarded from a weak excess of sensibility, there are 3 who need to be awakened from the slumber of cold vulgarity. The task of the modern educator is not to cut down jungles, but to irrigate deserts. So what does he mean by awakening someone from the cold slumber of cold vulgarity? From just pure reason or, whatever. Well, he explains the right defense against false sentiments here kind of being like emotions, he says, is to inculcate just sentiments. And what a phrase. Like, think about this for a second. Just sentiments, meaning justice, righteous. Your emotions are just and right. We don't think about emotions that way at all. I mean, Lewis would not also agree with a lot of people who emphasize, you do you just do whatever you feel like. Your emotions are just all about you. Yes, I mean, it's true that they are yours. If you say, I feel sad, I can't be like, false! Well, of course you feel sad. That's not what Lewis or I am getting at. But Lewis is saying, your sentiments, your emotions, your affections, the way that you feel about things can either accord with reason or not. They can either accord with the way things are or not. They can conform to the world around us or not. If you look at a beautiful waterfall and you say, that waterfall is sublime, are you just saying, that's my internal feelings, I'm humbled? Or are you saying, there's something intrinsic about this waterfall that makes my sentiment, my emotional reaction to it, righteous, just, correct, whatever you want to say? Lewis will fall on the second side of that question. And he uses this idea of the Tao, the Tao or the Tao. The Tao is how I'll pronounce it for the rest of this video, where the Tao is the doctrine of objective value, the belief that certain attitudes are really true and others really false to the kind of thing the universe is and the kind of thing we are. Why this is important is that our feelings can be part of the Tao or not. They can be, well, you're always going to be part of it, but you can conform to the Tao or not, more accurately. Your feeling of joy should be produced by something that's intrinsically joy-making. If you feel sad at good treatment of others, that sadness might be jealousy, envy, or some other negative emotion. We wouldn't say that's a just sentiment. It's wrong that you feel sad at someone else's success. It's worth listening to Lewis in Full in the Tao. He says, those who know the Tao can hold that to call children delightful or old men venerable is not simply to record a psychological fact about our own parental or filial emotions at the moment, but to recognize a quality which demands a certain response from us, whether we make it or not. I myself do not enjoy the society of small children. Because, Lewis says, I speak from within the Tao, I recognize this as a defect in myself, just as a man may have to recognize that he is tone deaf or colorblind. Do you hear what he's saying here? He's saying, because I know that young children are objectively good and we should have care for them, because I don't feel that way, my sentiments are not adjusted that way, I know that's a defect, it's improper, it's an unjust emotion, we might say. And he goes on to say, and because our approvals and disapprovals are thus recognitions of objective value, or responses to the objective order, that is the Tao, that real objective created order around us, and our sentiments should be adjusted to them. Therefore, emotional states can be in harmony with reason when we feel liking for what ought to be approved, or out of harmony with reason when we perceive that liking is due but cannot feel it, like you should love marriage but you don't feel love, or whatever. No emotion is in itself a judgment. In that sense, all emotions are sentiments and alogical. But they can be reasonable or unreasonable as they conform to reason or fail to conform. The heart never takes the place of the head, but it can and should obey it. But on this point of view that he's responding to, this sort of view that rationalism and emotions are so separated, your emotional response and reason can't even be at all connected. It's excluded from the outset. Emotions are something that are about utility. Can they be used for something that we want? Or should they just be corrected? If you feel good about patriotism, you're just a sucker, would be the idea here. So you should be reasonable. Is this actually useful, productive, efficient? And then you overlay that emotion with reason and you realize, okay, your reason is just what your internal chemical reactions are doing, but they're not really right or wrong or good or bad or whatever. But that's not what Lewis says. All of us should educate our emotions and sentiments in order to conform them to the way that things are, and therefore educate ourselves so that our heart mediates, we might say, between our senses and our head, so that it becomes the sort of approving and disapproving center of who we are, so that we rightly love what we should love, and we do not love what we should not love. I should not love harming someone else, but I should love helping someone else. I want my heart to be so trained that it's almost intrinsic, that I know that it is absolutely objectively right to help someone in need and wrong to harm someone who actually is in need. And the only way to do that consistently is to educate our sentiments, our emotions, is to train us what we should love and not love, to order our loves, to know there are objective realities, that awe is a real emotion of the world around us, and to become the kind of person that C.S. Lewis said is a man or a woman with chest, with heart, with the ability to feel and have right sentiments that are just, objectively, not subjectively. So I would never want to say to someone, you're just too emotional, or, man, you got to get over your feelings and just do what is right. Well, no. I want to say to someone, I want you to so be transformed that your sentiments and your emotions are just, and by habit, you truly feel as you ought to feel. When you see the beauty and wonder of nature, there's a sense of sublime humility in your heart that overflows, and that is objectively the right sentimental response, because there is something beyond space and time that is real about that awe that you experience outside of you. It is not merely a psychological state. It is a metaphysical effect of the real world on our sentiments. I want you to be more emotional. I want you to love more, have compassion more, just sentiment more. I want you to train your emotions. I don't want you to stop being emotional. I want you to be extra emotional. But I want, as C.S. Lewis advocates, you to have a heart, a real heart, in a faculty of the heart that mediates the mind and the sentiments, we might say, that is trained up to know how to love what you ought to love and how to disdain what you ought to disdain. That, I think, is C.S. Lewis's answer to the question, are young kids just too emotional? Well, they might be too merely emotional, but they need to be rightly ordered in their emotions. The emotions are not the problem. The training is the problem.